So Steve Harris says, I couldn't have started a punk band. That would have been against my religion. Steve Harris also says, talking about punk, we hated them. and we hated what they were about. Hello and welcome to Maiden Voyages, a podcast series devoted to exploring the peerless discography of the world's greatest heavy metal band, Iron Maiden. Across this series, we will be journeying through the band's entire discography, discussing, analysing, dissecting, celebrating, and possibly commiserating every single Iron Maiden record. This episode, we begin at the beginning with the band's 1980 self-titled debut, Iron Maiden. But first, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Blev. I like Iron Maiden. Sam, hello.
You have more credentials than that.
Oh, I don't know. Do you want a CV?
Yeah, you are a doctor of Welsh history.
That is true.
That makes you vaguely qualified to talk about the history of a British metal band.
True.
You specialise in Welsh steel.
Excellent.
So, there's puns aplenty.
Got any other nice things to say about me?
No, absolutely not. I'm Sam Carnicker. I am a staff writer for Distorted Sound, and I have a lot of opinions about heavy metal, apparently.
Excellent.
Also, I would like it noted that I would not necessarily call Maiden the greatest band of all time. What was your intro?
So, a peerless discography.
They literally had peers, but okay.
No, I stand by. When you think of how many Iron Maiden albums there are, the consistency of it, I can't think of another metal band with that level of consistency and solidity across such a big back catalogue.
Okay. I take minor exception with that, but that's fine.
Okay,
that's fine. We need variance of opinion here.
Greatest heavy metal band of all time?
Maybe. I don't know. I'd have to mull over. Let's see where we end up with as we go through the discography.
Okay, well, I would say it's a strong start. It's 1980.
Yeah.
Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden. When do you first remember hearing this record?
So I think the first time I heard this record would have been, what year did the early years Iron Maiden DVD come
2005,
out?
2005, I think.
So probably would have been around 2005 for me. Okay, maybe 2004. Early to mid noughties. It would have been wholly off the back of the early years DVD. I remember watching that religiously. I probably borrowed it from you. That makes most sense, seeing as you purchase every Iron Maiden item.
This is true.
And shortly after that, I think, again, you gifted me the LP of the first album, and that was my introduction to it. I already knew a bunch of Maiden. I mainly knew Number of the Beast and Dance of Death. So the first album was quite different to those.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because I think for most people of our generation, for the record, we are children of the late 80s. Got into Iron Maiden in the early 2000s. So for most of us, the first Iron Maiden album we heard was probably not the debut, was it? Like, we heard the Bruce stuff first, and then it was this sort of, in a kind of, it wasn't a pre-internet age, but it was like an age where the internet was slightly useless. We went back and realised, there's this other guy, Paul Di'Anno, there's these two records. And it was slightly weird hearing them for the first time, because it wasn't the Iron Maiden necessarily that we kind of gravitated towards, that we
No, and I think particularly
time.
For our age group, when we were turning like 13, 14, which seems to be the age that everyone gets into music and starts to like things, we were way past the original heyday of Iron Maiden already at that point, so what kind of filtered into the mainstream rock and metal sphere would have been Bruce Dickinson era stuff. Like, if you looked at, we watched a lot of Scuzz TV and Kerrang and MTV2, and like the stuff filtering onto that would have been Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills, maybe The Wicker Man, and so it would have that kind of defined Maiden for a lot of our age group of, I guess, millennials. Millennials.
We're sort of millennials, aren't we? Yeah. I'll tell you, when I first heard the Paul Di'Anno era Maiden, I think that's what led me to the first album, was actually the Visions of the Beast DVD. That I don't think is currently...
What is that?
Visions of the Beast. I think this was like about 2001, 2002. Maiden put out a DVD compilation of their music videos.
Okay.
which, having just said Iron Maiden, the greatest heavy metal band of all time, Iron Maiden music videos are hit and miss, it's fair to say. Bordering on quite bad mostly miss some of the time. But on that DVD, there was the first two songs were, I think the first track is Women in Uniform, which is Iron Maiden's first music video. Yeah. Which is a sort of interesting introduction to the early Diana stuff. That's a
cover, right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Well, we'll come on to that.
Yeah, there's more to say about that later. And a live version of Wrathchild from the Rainbow gig that's also on the Early Days DVD.
Okay.
Which I think they sort of cut out as like a standalone promo thing. But yeah, no, I remember when I first got the debut album, I absolutely loved it. I played it so much when I got it. Was it the same for you? Was it like...
No, I think for me, like, I enjoyed it, and there were definitely numbers that like really resonated with me, particularly stuff like Remember Tomorrow or Phantom of the Opera. But yeah, it was, and still isn't my go-to Maiden album. Like, it's not exactly what I want from Maiden. I think it's interesting and I think it's good mostly. But yeah, I didn't play it to death or anything.
Interesting. Well, we'll get on to that. But before we do, let's have a quiz.
Yay.
Or, as I like to call it, be quiz or be dead.
Oh, excellent. God, this is going to be a long podcast.
So, question 1, Sam. Should I assign points to these? Yeah, let's go for it. So
great. Yeah, put me on the spot. This will be fun.
A total of 3 points. Ugh. How many people had been in Iron Maiden prior to the release of their debut album? For the record, I'm not including the people who appeared on that album. So I'm not talking about Steve Harris, Dennis Stratton, Clive Burr, Dave Murray.
So how many ex-members did they have?
Yeah, but by the time they came to record that album.
I'm going to imagine it's a lot, just because the formation of bands include a lot of revolving doors. So maybe 12?
Oh, 13.
Oh,
13.
Oh, my educated guess was very near.
That was a very educated guess, actually. Well done. But still,
I've read a lot of rock band Wikipedia.
Yeah, but for 4 years, that's quite a lot of members, isn't it? 13.
I don't know. Like,
and those are the 13.
If you've ever tried forming a band, people fall out very quickly. Not as in like they fall out with each other. It's just life comes up and things change and. Yeah.
And when I was researching this, I thought I was an Iron Maiden superfan, but there are literally people I have never heard of, and I still can't remember the names of.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, to be fair, even looking at the first album, there's a guitarist who I completely forgot was in Iron Maiden.
Dennis Stratton. Yeah.
I just always think it's Adrian Smith, but obviously it wasn't.
Well, yeah. Things to say about Dennis Stratton and Adrian Smith coming up.
Wonderful.
Question 2. Iron Maiden had a keyboardist, but how many concerts did he play with the band?
I mean, at this point, they're not exactly a keyboard-focused band, so like 3?
1.
Okay.
So they had 1 gig for a keyboardist, and then...
never again.
And then
Steve said no.
Yeah, gave him his marching orders, which I find weird for a man who loved progressive rock music. And there are proggy moments in early Iron Maiden. I'm surprised he stamped that idea out so quickly.
Yeah, but I can also see how it would, particularly as their sound developed into what it would become for the first album, like a keyboard would dilute it a little bit. Like it softens it a bit too much.
It wouldn't be good, but I'd imagine Steve Harris would think it was a good idea.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I don't know, maybe his better judgment was in effect. So, question 3. Prior to the release of their debut album, Iron Maiden typically headlined their own pub shows, except for one concert where they opened for which well-known heavy metal band? If my memory serves me, this was about 78, 79, which is weird because for a young band, they didn't really open for other groups much. They did tend to headline it, but in pubs.
And in a UK
a UK band, they did open, and it wasn't on a tour, it was just for one show.
How many guesses do I get?
2. But it was by personal request of this band. I was surprised by this combination. It is a heavy metal band.
Judas Priest.
No, although they did tour with Judas Priest, but more on that later.
Okay, give me 2 more guesses, because I got 2 more I want to say.
Go on.
Saxon.
Nope.
Okay. And then the other one, which...
They did play with Saxon, but again, not in this instance.
Samson?
Again, they played with Samson, not the band I'm thinking of. Motorhead.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. Lemmy, apparently, according to Mick Wall's very good biography of Iron Maiden, asked Steve Harris in about 78, 79 to open this one-off show for them.
That's oddly specific.
Yeah. So, not a bad result for the first quiz, Sam. That's all right.
I mean, it's all downhill from here.
We didn't get any of the answers correct.
No,
but
exactly.
They weren't ridiculously bad answers.
So there's only room for improvement. That's what you're saying.
Exactly, yeah.
Wonderful.
So Morby Quiz will be dead next time.
Yay.
So would you like to know about the history of the making of Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden?
I would, but... And for everyone listening at home, all three of you, for context, Blevin has warned me that he has made 9 pages of notes for this episode. So I would like to hear about the history of the making of Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden. But if you could keep it concise, that would be great.
I'm not promising anything at this point.
No, I thought you wouldn't.
But I would say that, really, just watch the early days DVD, isn't it? Like, not now, like, listen to this podcast, but once you've listened to this podcast...
Yeah, don't alienate our 2 listeners already.
And also, the band have put the documentary bit, it's all up on their YouTube channel for free, which is very nice of them.
Is that how you did your research?
But that was one of many sources I consulted in this very thorough research, but yeah.
Cool.
Always good to watch Steve Harris chatting. Is he in the Carton Horses or the Ruskin Arms? But it's always nice seeing him back there. Just like a sort of an old man looking nostalgic, going, I remember the day.
Wasn't even that old at that point.
Well, he'd have been in his early to mid 40s in 2005, would he?
Yeah, that's not old.
Yeah, the 12 Wasted Years video is
old.
Also worth watching, which is quite good in the early days of Iron Maiden.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's on YouTube as well.
All right, hit me up with some history.
Okay, so formed in 1975, Iron Maiden are the creation of Steve Harris, formed on Christmas Day in 1975. Like, what kind of Christmas is Steve Harris having?
I was about to ask. Like,
I've got no other context for that. But it's imagine Steve having like dinner with
Pass
his
me
family.
the roast potatoes. Oh, by the way, do you want to form a premier heavy metal band?
I'm going to form a pioneering heavy metal band.
But
Back
also,
to Christmas.
Who is he forming it with on Christmas
I don't
Day?
know.
Like his mum and dad?
But this is the thing. I think, well, in Iron Maiden mythology, when Steve's telling the story, I think that's when he got the idea.
Okay.
So I don't think to say Iron Maiden formed on 75. I think
It's
that's
a
when,
lie. It's a barefaced lie.
That's when Steve, after he had his roast potatoes, thought, you know what, I'm going to form a band called Iron Maiden.
And like a post-roast haze.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's the best time to form a band. Full of turkey, full of life. Going to take on the world.
Sure.
But Steve had been in a group called Smiler, and Steve's telling of it as he left Smiler because they wouldn't play his songs because they said they were too complicated and proggy and too many weird time signatures, which sounds about right.
Sounds feasible. It's also a terrible band name, Smiler.
Yeah, it's a very mid-70s band name, Smiler, isn't it?
Yeah, but even by mid-70s rock standards, it's scraping about.
Weren't Queen called Smile or something before they were called Queen?
Sounds plausible.
Possibly. Anyway. But yeah, maybe worth talking about Steve Harris for a bit. One of the most...
Only a bit.
A bit, well...
Because we're going to be talking about him a lot.
Well, I know, but at this point,
general.
I mean, surely one of the most influential people in heavy metal that most people have never heard of?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. You've got Steve Harris, you've got Hetfield and Lars.
Got Iommi.
You've got Iommi, you've got Halford and Tipton and Downing and... Yeah.
In the extreme metal world, you've got like Chuck Schuldiner and those
but
guys. I mean, they're not approaching the same level of influence that
exactly.
Steve Harris had.
I guess it's the mainstream side of heavy metal that will always have the most cultural significance. So, like, Chuck, you're out, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's probably
Sorry.
true. But yeah, I guess if you're thinking of those kind of people, you could probably almost count them on the fingers of one hand, right? People who have genuinely shaped...
I think we're literally on 2 hands already.
Well, no, hang on. Where were we? Hetfield. Do we need Hetfield and Ulrich? Can't we just combine them to...
They're not one sentient being.
I mean, I would maybe drop Ulrich and put Mustaine in there.
For
his
I
role
would
in-
have all 3 of them, to be honest.
Okay, fine.
I think Ulrich... I mean, this is a massive tangent, but
I get the
Ulrich
feeling
is
this
a
is the way this is
driving
gonna go.
force of Metallica.
Yeah, okay. So let's say Hetfield, Ulrich, Mustaine, Iommi, Harris, Halford.
If you've got Halford, you probably have to have Tipton and Downing. Maybe you could combine them as one.
I mean,
Then
maybe
you've
just
gotta-
lose Downing.
Yeah, okay. That's probably for the best at this point. Then you got to add Lemmy to the list.
Oh,
So
Lemmy,
we're
of
already
course,
at,
yeah.
8 or
Okay,
something.
yeah, still. But there's not... It's quite a small club
Sure,
of
okay.
people, I'd say. And Harris is a part of that. And if you were to put one member of Maiden in that club, it has to be Harris.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think what strikes me about Steve Harris from a very early age is he's a very uncompromising guy, which is, well, at this point is his greatest strength, probably.
Yeah.
Later on, maybe less so. But
Also, yeah.
there is something quite remarkable about people who are so unbending. And that's sort of part of the sort of, I'm always a bit skeptical talking about metal as having an ideology, but that idea of being uncompromising, unbending, that is part of it, isn't it? And I always think Harris is
I don't think that's
of that.
necessarily the ideology of metal. I think it's more just like he's a creative guy who had a vision.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Like in the same way that someone like, and not that I'm equating them, but someone like David Bowie or Prince, like all these artists have visions and are pretty uncompromising in realizing those visions. And that's, for better or for worse, what makes them quite amazing creatives.
Yeah, true. But anyway, so Steve forms Maiden Christmas Day in 1975. He moves quite quickly. They play their first gig in 76. They have a semi-residency at the Cart and Horses pub in the East End of London, which we went to, didn't we?
Random trivia: when Blevin got married, as part of his stag do, I made sure the night ended at the Cart and Horses. By that point, everyone was really drunk and tired, so maybe it wasn't enjoyed with its, the full reverence we should have given it. But it was nice to be there.
It was nice. Nice smoking area.
I was really tired. I wanted to go home.
Very adequate classic rock metal covers band playing.
Yep, I remember that.
Very adequate.
Quite warm beer.
It was warm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But what I find weird about the Cart and Horses is it seems like an island of the old East End in what is now a completely different landscape. Like
definitely.
To the world Maiden played in. So it's a sort of weird historical artifact for lots of ways, Cart and Horses, because it's surrounded by these new developments and the Olympic Stadium.
Well, that whole part of the East End is very... I mean, this is a huge tangent again, but it's...
Well, I think this is part of the cultural history, isn't it?
There's an interesting dichotomy to it since London 2012, whereas you literally come out of Stratford Station. On one side, you've got Westfield Stratford, the Olympic Park, lots of offices, lots of restaurants. And on the other side, you've got, like, the old school Stratford shopping mall, and then, like, slightly further along, just a much more down-to-earth high street, and the Cart and Horses a bit further along. And it's, like... It's really bizarre coming out of Stratford Station and you just see like the modern world and the past, and I don't know, they never shall the twain meet, I guess.
Yeah, and so it's hard to get a sense of that world that Iron Maiden was born into, like the very working class East End docks. 1975, we're still thinking about car factories, the Cray twins.
I'm just imagining Iron Maiden playing it in Westfield Stratford now. Okay.
Or just loads of people, like sort of businessmen in their suits coming down from the city being like,
this isn't for me.
No. Oh dear. But yeah, so we have multiple lineup changes that we could just list everyone who's in Iron Maiden.
Please don't.
No, we're not.
I beg of you.
We're not going to, if you're really interested, look them up. They're just people living their lives. And then we get to... So 1978, November 1978, Paul Di'Anno joining is, I guess, the first semi-solid Iron Maiden lineup. So at this point, you've got Paul Di'Anno, Dave Murray, Steve Harris, Doug Sampson on drums, who's actually the first Iron Maiden studio recording. It's not the debut album, but with Doug Sampson on drums.
Okay.
Who, from all accounts, goes on to really do nothing else drum-related after leaving Iron Maiden.
Never realised there was someone pre-Clive Burr.
Yeah, well, yeah, when we get to the Soundhouse tapes and what have you, that is Doug Sampson. Yeah, Clive Burr actually, as we'll find out, joins very late before the debut's recorded.
Oh.
Yeah, he's very new. But also interesting that a lot of those early shows, or 78, 79, they're actually a one-guitar band. There are lots of...
That's surprising.
Yeah, there are lots of second guitarists who come and go. Again, you can find out their names if you choose.
I'm good.
But yeah, I think most of us are all right, aren't we? But a lot of the gigs there actually plays a four-piece. So with apparently Steve Harris doing a lot of the twin, like the guitar harmonies, but harmonising on the bass.
Which makes a lot of sense in terms of like the band would continue to have bass guitar lines that are often like guitar lines.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I imagine it would have been very interesting to see Iron Maiden's a four-piece, but it seems that the realisation always was, at least in Steve's mind, we are a two-guitar band.
Yeah.
Which, again, makes Maiden a little bit different within the context of the time. I'm thinking more mid to late 70s.
Mid to late 70s, but I mean, I guess you already have Priest at that point.
You have Priest, you have Thin Lizzy.
Yeah.
But they're the two, really. I mean, a bit early, you've got
Wishbone Ash.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of running out of steam by the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
And I guess always had one foot more in prog rather than
right. But I mean,
rock.
if Steve is coming from a prog influenced background anyway,
Yeah, it makes sense.
I'm
but-
just saying he didn't come up with twin guitar leads.
No, he didn't come up with twin.
I want that on the
and he
record.
didn't even come up with the harmonised twin guitar lines. But well, when we talk about the album, we'll get to it. Like Maiden did seem to exploit that.
That's fair.
More than other bands, didn't they? And I think the other thing that's interesting is that by the time Paul Di'Anno joins in '78, November '78, most of the first album's already been written.
Yeah.
Which was something, I don't know why that hadn't occurred to me, but it's hard for me to imagine those songs without Paul's voice in them. And yet, actually, when he joined the band, it was pretty much, okay, here's the set list, and these are the songs that we don't know it yet, but are going to be on our debut album. They're already here. So just looking at the first live bootleg we've got of Iron Maiden. So for those of you interested, have a little look on YouTube for the Dennis Wilcock Days bootleg, which from all accounts, now, it sounds legit to me. Does it sound legit, this bootleg?
Yeah.
I've not heard anyone question the authenticity of it, but...
I mean, it sounds legit, as in it's a very poorly recorded selection of 30-second snippets from shows.
Yeah, I don't get why they've cut some of them. I'd quite like to hear the whole things. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, probably.
I imagine just because the quality of them was so poor, and like it would have been recorded on cassette, like on someone's boombox or something, so everything would have deteriorated at a certain point.
Yeah, that's true. But let's take like a typical Iron Maiden set list from the mid-June 1977, or the middle of 1977. So, opening with I Got the Fire, which is a cover by the band Montrose. Know anything about Montrose?
I know nothing about Montrose other than Maiden cover them quite a lot.
Yeah, particularly that Maiden have covered that song as a B-side twice. Fun fact. There's a there's a live recording with Di'Anno as a B-side of I Got the Fire. Then they do a studio version with Bruce. That's one of the B-sides from one of the Number of the Beast singles.
Oh, okay.
They really love that song.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know why. Like, it's just quite a generic 70s hard rock song. But anyway, they open with I Got the Fire. Oh, Montrose as well. Sammy Hagar's first band.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is he Canadian, Sammy Hagar?
I don't know.
Oh, great chat.
Maybe.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. This isn't the Sammy Hagar podcast. I don't know, maybe you'd like that idea down, Sam? Sammy Hagar podcast? Is that something people want?
Absolutely not.
So they open with I Got the Fire. Then they go into Drifter.
So I've just checked. Sammy Hagar's from California.
California.
Canada, California.
Fair enough. Okay.
Interchangeable.
Well, we've established that Sammy Hagar is from California, not Canada, and that Iron Maiden really liked the song I Got the Fire.
Right.
Then they play Drifter, which won't appear again. Well, it will appear again this week, actually, but will appear again next episode.
Okay.
Because it's on Killers.
Ah.
And again, that was written, they were performing that in 77. Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Prowler. Burning Ambition. Another Life. Again, to be seen next episode. Transylvania. Strange World. A song called Floating that eventually reappears as Purgatory on Killers. Charlotte the Harlot, Wrathchild, and Iron Maiden. So how many songs?
Interesting set list.
What is? I mean, it's a sort of compilation of the first two albums, but they're playing it in 77. So this is, in the case of Killers, this is, 4 years before Killers comes out?
Yeah. It's still 2 to 3 years before the debut album.
So how many songs have we got? Well, Sanctuary, for the sake of argument, let's say that's on the debut. I know it's not. But Sanctuary, Prowler, Burning Ambition shows up against the B-side of this album, Strange World, Charlotte the Harlot, Iron Maiden. So we've got pretty much half the albums being played live in 77.
Yeah.
But having listened to it, what did you think about those 77 versions? Because I think those songs go on a massive journey in the space of a few years.
It's definitely the sound of a band not having quite found like their groove yet, right? Like the bones of the songs are there. Everything sounds much slower, for one. Everything sounds much closer to, and this is something I'll mention a few times, closer to Deep Purple, even though I think a lot of the album sounds like Deep Purple anyway, but that's the whole thing. But yeah, there just isn't the edge and intensity that the album would go on to have in those early, like, bootleg recordings.
Yeah, it is a lot slower, and it's just the tempo of it has this real... It's like that 70s swing. Like you said, Deep Purple, like Ian Pace, who's basically a jazz drummer in a hard rock band, and it's all kind of like a shuffle, a swing, a kind of boogie groove to it.
It's just a bit boring, if I'm honest.
I wouldn't say, like, things like the riff to Iron Maiden is still a weird riff.
Yeah, but like, listening to that bootleg, you wouldn't think this band is going to be, like, a harbinger of an entire genre of music.
No, but yet there are things you just like Prowler, even slowed down and with a slight swing to it. You know, putting it in its context, it's still heavy. But you know, it's 1977 heavy, right? Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It's interesting, and I wonder how they got from essentially sounding like a slightly weird 70s hard rock band in 77 to in 1980 to me sounding like an unquestionable heavy metal band. Like, what makes Steve go, actually, we need to tighten this up, like lose the swing. It's all like staccato, you know, Prowler, rather than, you know, dun dun dun, you know, almost like a sort of.
Well, I think the cultural context alone, right, is that obviously, like, punk has started to take off in quite a big way across that period of time in the background. Obviously, Iron Maiden have always considered themselves very distinct from that, but I guess that there being an audience wanting like a slightly harder edge to the music and slightly more up tempo and more aggression is probably something that just filters in organically into playing those songs live very often to an audience.
Funny you say that. Do you want to hear what Steve Harris says about the songs? About how that,
even if I didn't want to hear, I feel like I'm going to hear.
We're going to hear it. So Steve Harris said, "I think we were just naturally fast artists because of that adrenaline. It's not like we sat down and said, oh, we're going to play fast. You start with adrenaline and get on stage, and it was even faster than it was when you recorded it. Sometimes it can get a bit out of hand, but the energy at a gig can be really quite amazing at times. It was never premeditated," is what Steve Harris says.
I mean, that's also fair. You talk to anyone who plays in the band and they'll often say, like, yeah, when we play stuff live, we play it almost 2 times as fast just because of like the adrenaline and the rush.
But even if you played it faster, it's not just the pace. I think it's the kind of, if I knew more about music theory, I could articulate this better. It's it's not just the tempo, it's that loss of swing to me. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's that staccato, the sort of more metallic edge. And I have a theory about this. I'm not saying Steve Harris is a liar, but 2 words, Judas Priest.
Yeah.
That Iron Maiden never talk about in interviews, which is weird. They never acknowledge Priest as an influence. But to me, the difference between 77 and 80 is that Priest have released Stay in Class, they've released Unleashed in the East, and that's to me those are the first real metal records that go for that, you know, kind of that taut,
particularly
staccato attack.
Unleashed in the East, because that sort of reframed so much of Priest's discography at that point into like, this is heavy metal.
And even though Maiden never talk about them as an influence, I did come across a quote from Steve where he's talking about punk and saying, you know, he's trying to debunk the argument that punk killed rock, but saying, in the late 70s I saw Priest and they were doing really big things. You know, there were still loads of people who wanted this type of music. Yeah. So clearly Maiden did listen to and like Priest. It's funny how they don't talk about it, because they're quite happy talking about a lot of other influences. I wonder if there's a little insecurity there, perhaps, maybe.
If you think of British heavy metal, particularly in the 80s, the 2 big bands would be Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. So I can see why they would want to, when mythologizing their own narrative, try to stay distinct from Priest and not say, Priest put out Unleashed in the East, so I thought, gonna make the songs faster and harder.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it?
But that would be the truth, Steve.
You can handle the truth, Steve. So they've got a sort of semblance of like a stable lineup in place now. What we get then, 78, 79, a lot of gigging, but largely they are confined to the East End of London. Like if you look at Maiden tour dates, they don't really break out of the East End. So you're talking the Cart and Horses, the Ruskin Arms. There's a handful of pubs where Maiden essentially play weekly. But what struck me, like compared to say being in a band now, is like how often Maiden were able to play. Like even if they're confined to the East End, they're playing at least every week, sometimes multiple gigs a week, and they're basically doing that within the same postcode. Like that would be sort of impossible now, wouldn't it? For a young unsigned band to play that regularly.
Well,
and for people to show up.
Yeah, for people to show up, but also promoters would prevent you from doing that. Like playing in bands, I remember like having to agree to not playing another gig in the London area. I'm doing air quotes for anyone listening. In the London area within a 3-week period.
As an unsigned band?
What? We're not making any money from this gig, and the London area is pretty big.
That is...
But stuff like that is rife because there's so many people who will play in unsigned bands that there's always a huge litany to pick from for promoters.
That's mad, isn't it? So, like, for a band like Maiden now, like you said, that'd be literally impossible. And yet that is seemingly where they honed their craft. And that is where they built up an audience, because by the end of 78, they've got a pretty rabid, dedicated, loyal following. So they can play the Ruskin Arms every week and pack that place out week after week after week.
I mean, similar stuff is happening even 10 years later. I know it's not quite equatable, but if you read, like, I don't know, the early days of Guns N' Roses, they're just playing around LA pretty much a few nights a week around the same sort of bits of the Sunset Strip, doing residencies effectively. And, like, to varying degrees of quality by all accounts. But yeah, that ability to hone your craft with, like, almost daily gigs is not really something that exists anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, isn't it? That whole sort of model of being in a band has just disappeared. But for Maiden, that was the model, right? You gigged week after week after week. And also it's around this time they start developing aspects of the stage show, which, you know, having been to the Cart and Horses, it's not a big pub, is it?
No, I mean, it is...
I mean, it's just a normal pub.
Like... Yeah, it's a normal, boxy little pub that has, once you go in, like, a stage on the left-hand side in the bar area.
Yeah, and that's it.
Okay.
But Maiden were playing those venues, but it's around that time, 77, 78, they get that iconic Iron Maiden sign. It's not the backdrop. You know the one I'm thinking of? It's got that almost like papier-mâché Eddie head on it.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, the head, like, drools... like
blood, yeah.
Corn syrup blood.
So they'd, like, adapted an old fish tank. That,
as you do,
yeah, and just filled it full of, like, fake blood. And so doing Iron Maiden.
Have you packed the amps? Yep. You packed the microphones? Yep. Fish tank?
Oh,
no.
Oh, god damn it. But yeah, so that would just sort of spew forth blood across the stage. And I quite like that. That's really cool, I think.
Yeah, it's a nice visual element to things. And it's a very low budget precursor for things to come.
But it also speaks to that band's ambition, doesn't it? That Maiden were never a band, even when they were playing pubs. Steve clearly had his eye on bigger things. Because if you're happy playing pubs, you know, you just show up, you enjoy it, and lots of people do that. That's what most bands are. People just enjoy playing live, don't really have, you know, any commercial ambitions of it. They just think, this is a nice thing to do with my friends. Happy days. Steve was clearly not thinking that, was he?
No, I guess not.
Which, you know, and that sort of speaks to the production, the level of theatricality, and also, like, how good they are. Like, when you see that early footage, there's footage of them in the Ruskin Arms, I think.
Right.
That's a bit later, 79. Again, it's on the early days DVD.
Yeah.
Like, it's just one handheld. It's quite good for a bootleg. Like, it's one camera, but it's filmed relatively decently. And musically, they are so tight.
Yeah. Okay, so we're at a point where the band lineup is stabilized. Their set list has refined quite a lot through live gigs, through frequent live gigs. And they effectively have residency of the East End of London for reasons unbeknownst to us.
Well, just local, isn't it?
Really? Yeah. But I mean, to your earlier point, them playing like a couple of nights a week or at least once a week, with only 8 songs, you'd think people might get a little bored of it. But they've developed a cult following anyway. Yeah. So I guess for any band, particularly in that era, on that precipice, like the next step is demos, right?
Yeah, would be demos. But before we get there, there's this one final point. The reason why, Steve's theory at least, why they don't get out of the East End is it's 1977, 78 and punk. Right. Okay. So Steve says nobody's interested in them. They try and get gigs elsewhere, you know, throughout London at least, try and spread their wings, build an audience, but no venues will book them because they're not a punk band. Now, punk, in this context, I think it's important here, isn't it? Particularly for this album, because when it was written about at the time and since, people always talk about the influence of punk on this album. Now, do you want to hear what Steve Harris has to say about punk?
Is Steve Harris going to debunk my thunk about punk?
Good. Maybe, if I knew what that meant. So, Steve Harris says, I couldn't have started a punk band. That would have been against my religion. Steve Harris also says, talking about punk, we hated them. and we hated what they were about. So, Steve Harris doesn't like punk, apparently.
Man, Steve Harris coming in hard for punk.
It's so funny, though, because any time, like, an knowing interviewer broaches this topic about the first album. Like, oh yeah, you could really hear those punk influences.
Well, I'm really glad this wasn't me interviewing Steve Harris.
Yeah.
Saying, oh yeah, punk in the background gave you a harder edge. No!
But you can see it visibly angers him, the slightest suggestion that this record and Iron Maiden around this time were in any way influenced around punk. Because Steve would say it's the opposite. They set themselves up as the antithesis. They were almost a reaction against punk. He doesn't like punk, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, I'm not saying he's wrong. I mean, he clearly doesn't like punk.
Couldn't you, and I mean, this is pedantry, but I love pedantry. Couldn't you say a reaction against punk is being influenced by punk? You are directly spurred into action by punk. So take that, Steve.
I know, it's a fair point, isn't it? Like, when we get to the album, we can discuss the musical influences of punk or not. And that's Steve, right? Paul Di'Anno is a different story altogether, but that's Steve's point of view.
That's a fair point.
So what was your lovely little link before I cut you off about punk? The next logical step would be...
So the next logical step is demos.
Ah, funny you should say that, Sam. Because on the 30th and 31st of December 1978, Iron Maiden go to Spacewood Studios in Cambridge to record their first demo. Cool. Why do you think they went on the 30th and 31st of December?
Were the studio rates cheap because it was nearly New Year's Eve?
Spot on, exactly. So it was pretty much New Year's Eve and the day before, so they recorded the whole thing for 200 quid. They laid down 4 songs, so we get Iron Maiden, we get Invasion, which is interesting, Prowler, and we get Strange Days. The recording of Strange Days doesn't see the light of day for a long time, though. But there's another little story that goes along with this. They went into the studio New Year's Eve, recorded it for 200 quid. The plan was they wanted to go back and they wanted to do a few overdubs, remix it, whatever. Studio says, okay, yeah, but the time for that, it's going to cost you 50 quid. Maiden say, don't worry, we'll be back, hold the tapes. They come back several weeks later, say, here's your 50 quid. Can we do those overdubs? Can we remix it? At which point the studio say to them, oh, sorry, we've wiped the tapes.
Oh, wow.
So apparently tape was just quite expensive and the studio said they couldn't afford to hold it. So what we get, which becomes known as the Soundhouse tapes, the first official Maiden demo recording, that's the totally unremixed, pretty much first take, recorded as live.
No overdubs.
No overdubs, yeah. Which is, again, when you think how tight that demo is...
Yeah, it's a pretty solid offering.
It's a pretty good document,
They just, like, literally one and done it. Like, that's a good turnout.
And what is interesting is that they record this in the end of 78. It doesn't see the light of day until late 79. So they pretty much sit on it for a year... And it's actually only when their deal with EMI is sort of in the works, they decide, hang on, we could just self-release that demo we recorded a year ago.
Right.
Hence how we get the Soundhouse tapes, the classic 7-inch, limited to 5,000 copies through mail order, sells out very quickly. Now, of course, one of the most collectible new wave of British heavy metal, one of the most collectible heavy metal.
How much does it go for nowadays?
It can go for over £1,000. Yeah, it is steep.
It's a spicy meatball.
It is steep. I mean, I have a copy of something that looks like the Soundhouse tapes.
You have a bootleg of the bootleg.
Yeah, it's quite. it's a very good, but also, as well as being one of the most collectible, it's also one of the most heavily bootlegged metal releases of all time. And I didn't pay over £1,000 for it.
No, so it's probably not legit.
I probably still paid more than I should have done. But it's about 50 quid. But but still, like. Yeah, those are incredibly collectible. You've listened to it. What do you think of like those songs? Let's leave Strange Days for the time being, because they were never happy with that, hence why it's not included on the official release.
So I think the thing that surprised me about the Soundhouse tapes is like how fully formed everything sounds at that point. Like it's just kind of, oh yeah, these could be studio demos or scratch tracks for the actual album at this point. Like, I don't feel like the arrangements were particularly different to what goes on in the debut.
It's like a tad slower, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess
like
maybe.
A touch slower.
And then, if I remember correctly, like the track listing, in fact, I think you just mentioned, has like Invasion and stuff in it. So songs that would become B-sides.
Yeah, Invasion's, when you think, right, this is our showcase to the world. Yeah. And we spoke about the band's setlist in 77. We know what songs they've got. Like Transylvania, Charlotte the Harlot, Wrathchild, Drifter, all these songs are floating about, and they choose to record Invasion.
Yeah, it's not a banger,
no,
if I'm honest.
It's a weird song, Invasion, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely B-side filler
It's
material.
such an odd chorus that it's like, the Norsemen are coming, the Norsemen are coming, diddle-a-da-da, diddle-a-da-da. It's a really oddly jaunty song about Vikings. I mean, good heavy metal lyrical content, Vikings, that's solid metal lyrics.
That wouldn't take off for another 20 years, really.
No, it's true. I mean, did Iron Maiden invent Viking metal? Discuss.
No.
No. Okay, excellent.
No.
Let's move on. The other thing about the Soundhouse tapes that struck me as interesting, according to Rod Smallwood, because by the point it's actually released, Maiden have a fair degree of public profile.
Yeah.
HMV and Virgin Records actually got in contact with the band saying, we would like to stock this, because people have been going into HMVs and Virgin saying, hello, have you got the Soundhouse tapes by Iron Maiden?
Right.
So potentially they could have printed off another 30,000 copies of this.
It could have been a proper commercial
Yeah, it could have been a
release.
proper, they had their own record label, in quote marks, and they could have stocked it in shops, but they decided not to, A, because their debut album's around the corner, and B, they thought, well, this is a nice memento for diehards through the mail order, which is, that's quite a nice sentiment, isn't it? Like, yeah, that's fine, okay. I thought it was quite nice, but I think
it shows like a level of integrity for the band, even at that early point, that like actually they're not going to try and nickel and dime people.
And that's it, isn't it?
That may change in future installments.
Okay, well, no, but I think that kind of integrity is sort of a hallmark of Iron Maiden's character, that there is that sort of fan-orientated... I mean, don't get me wrong, they are good at squeezing money out of their fans, but they tend to do so in ways that their fans are quite happy to go along with. Like, I'm happy for Steve Harris to squeeze me financially. and any other way he would like to squeeze me.
Oh, lordy.
Moving on. So once they've got the demo out, and even before, Maiden are beginning to build up some profile now. And so in 79, they go on... Well, they're basically touring the UK throughout the whole of 1979. We spoke just now about that touring infrastructure not existing. I think it is worth having a look at some of the places Iron Maiden played in 79 as an unsigned band, right? So they're touring around the UK in their bus, The Green Goddess. Have you heard them talk about The Green Goddess?
No.
This kind of ramshackle, converted, like, lorry that they've turned into a sort of makeshift tour bus that is notoriously unreliable, sleeping in it in all weathers. But if you look at some of the places they played, so beginning in August, we've got Birkenhead, London, Gwent.
Nice.
So exactly, they played the Newbridge Memorial Hall. Newbridge is near Blackwood, so it's like a mining town. Again, an unsigned band. Then they've got 3 nights in London, the Music Machine, the Ruskin Arms. Then they play Swansea.
Yeah.
A venue called Circles, presumably no longer there.
So wait, they go to Wales, come back to London, go back to Wales.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is taken from the Iron Maiden website, where they've got this sort of document of all their historic touring. Then from Swansea, they go to Port Talbot.
Okay.
This is the first of 2 times they played Port Talbot in 1979.
Nice.
Like,
if only they would come to South Wales this often now.
Can you imagine seeing Iron Maiden in Port Talbot?
It'd be great. It would be like the time we saw Wasp in Ebervale Leisure Centre.
Well, that's part of my sideline as a sort of history PhD person. I sort of follow lots of like Port Talbot historical Facebook pages. I was going to put, maybe I should do it, put a comment going, hello, do you remember the 9 Volts Club in Port Talbot? It's sort of like one of those pages for like old people who like talking about the past. So, do you remember the 9 Volts Club in Port Talbot? Did you see Iron Maiden at the 9 Volts Club in Port Talbot? Nice. I want to speak to you. I will buy you a drink. Just tell me about what that was like, because that must have been phenomenal.
Maybe that could be a side episode for this.
Yeah, just me interviewing.
Just let Dr. Penny interviews someone from Port Talbot.
So, we have David Evans. Well, hello, David. You saw Iron Maiden in Port Talbot, did you? Oh, boys, yeah. Great it was. Fantastic.
That's the entire episode. Just done.
Did you enjoy yourself? Oh, lovely time. Thanks, David.
Great. Thanks.
But yeah, then they come back to Gwent. So they're back in Newbridge. They're back in Port Talbot. They play Tonopandi in the Rhondda.
Wow, okay.
They play Blackpool, Burton-upon-Trent, Liverpool, Birkenhead again, Warrington, Middlesbrough, Swindon, Exeter.
These are all really oddly specific places for an unsigned
for a band
heavy
that
metal
don't have an album out. Yeah, it's phenomenal. And that's just August to December 79. And again, I was thinking, unsigned bands, you can't do that now. Like,
absolutely not.
No, there were 49 gigs they played towards the end of 79.
Wow.
A 49 gig UK tour. Imagine trying to do that now.
Yeah, well,
unless it was like this massive anti-project and you had tons of money to
I think like one of the big things is money and the ability to do that. Like, presumably, whilst I don't imagine Iron Maiden were making much money during this tour, they were making enough to finance the touring, whereas so many unsigned bands or even signed bands of like a small scale nowadays will be filled with members who have other day jobs, and they're squeezing their week of touring in between like annual leave bookings. So there's just not the financial, not even incentive, but like financial ability to do that.
Weirdly, I think most of the guys in Maiden still had day jobs or about to quit their day jobs at this point. I mean, what kind of day job you'd have that would allow you to take weeks and weeks of leave?
I just need to take 49 days off. I'm going to Wales.
Well, I think Dave Murray was a cleaner for the council, I think, just until they signed their record deal. I don't know, what was Steve Harris doing? I did read this, I can't remember. But it was some job, it was like largely a morning job or something, so he could like do his work in the mornings.
Yeah.
He wasn't a postman, but it was something like a postman, like...
I mean, yeah, but if you're traveling around the UK, like, it doesn't really matter how flexible your job is. You need time off to do that.
Yeah, true. But I guess, but Maiden were getting paid. That's the thing. They probably weren't getting paid a lot, but they presumably...
enough to pay for fuel.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I assume beer at that point rather than
the
food.
impression you get is that it wasn't, it was hardly like they had loads, but they weren't necessarily living in dire poverty. They were at least able to break even and to make this a commercially worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah. Okay.
So extensive touring. They've got a demo. Now, two people before we get to the album itself. Okay, so two people who are integral to the Maiden story.
Yeah.
First one, Neil Kay.
Never heard of him.
It's Neil Kay.
Sorry, Neil. I just don't know who you are.
Neil Kay, Sam. Come on.
You can say his name as many times as you want. It won't make me know who he is.
Let me enlighten you. Neil Kay was the resident DJ and the manager of the Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse, which is the most convoluted name for a club. Yeah. It's like a rock and metal club, so it's the Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse. I mean, he can get rid of at least two of those words.
Yeah.
I would suggest. So, often known simply as the Bandwagon or the Soundhouse. If you go,
I would have gone with Metal House.
Yeah, the Metal House. Not the Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse. It's too many words, Neil. But anyway, a quick tangent. If you go on YouTube, there was a program in the 80s called 20th Century Box.
Okay.
Which it's like a documentary series, 20 minutes looking at different aspects of pop culture. One of them is about Iron Maiden and the Bandwagon Club. So if you want to see Neil Kay being interviewed, it's worth watching him because he's an interesting guy.
Okay, so Neil Kay is this proprietor of Bandwagon Funhouse
of Noel's Funhouse,
and he's in Maiden's corner. He's playing them a lot.
Well, exactly. Yeah, he's not yet, but Steve Harris gives Kay a copy of the Soundhouse tapes, and the story goes as Kay, who seems like a slightly pompous man, was quite dismissive of it and going, I'll get 1 million demo tapes a day, mate. You'll be lucky if I listen to this. But as it goes, of course, he does listen to it, and he goes, oh, this is actually quite good.
Right.
And he starts playing the demo tape at the club, and alongside the club itself was a sort of chart, like based on the most requested songs that the people who went to the club went to.
Right.
Prowler gets to the top of the Bandwagon chart.
Okay.
Now, why that is significant is that this chart was printed in Sounds magazine. I don't quite understand why, other than the fact that Jeff Barton, who wrote for Sounds, liked, what was then considered heavy metal and seemed to like the club, and so he printed the chart. So that
does really explain why he prints the oddly specific Neil's Funhouse chart thing.
It is. Like, where do you think that this is? Yeah, this is, and quite how this chart is compiled, I don't know. This is just people going up to him going, oh, can you play Prowler?
I'm not sure just got like a little abacus by the side of the stage. All right, that's one for Maiden.
Prowler, one Hellbent for Leather, okay. But either way, that gets Maiden into the music press.
Okay.
And also, Maiden get into the music press around the time a lot of bands, heavy metal bands, are starting to pop up in the UK, right? What we think of as the new wave of British heavy metal, which again is Jeff Barton's phrase. Apparently, he comes up with that phrase, the new wave of British heavy metal, when he's reviewing a gig that features Maiden on the bill. It's Iron Maiden, Angel with Samson, 1979. Jeff Barton calls this the new wave of British heavy metal. New wave of British heavy metal.
watershed moment.
Yeah, well, it's a watershed moment, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a game changer.
Sarkily, but yeah, I guess it is a watershed moment.
And for me, the new wave of British heavy metal is actually, it's not the birth of heavy metal, but it's the birth of heavy metal culture.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, no, but in the sense, let me elaborate here. In the sense that before the new wave of British heavy metal, metal hasn't been codified, or is only kind of beginning to be codified in that sense of
I mean, like
a dress code, a media that supports it, magazines. You know, it's like after the new wave of British heavy metal, you get Kerrang.
Well, also, like, the bands that would be referred to as heavy metal before the new wave of British heavy metal were always, like, quite varied. Like, it would be everything from Sabbath to Zeppelin to Alice Cooper.
To, like, Rush and Gary Moore would be heavy metal. UFO would be heavy metal. Exactly, right? Yeah, it was actually... The sound sort of comes together, doesn't it?
Yeah, okay.
And so Iron Maiden are, at this point, probably... If not the most successful, they are the hype band of the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of the press.
I could buy that.
And then following on from that, Maiden appear. So this would be like the first like proper studio recording we get from Iron Maiden.
Right.
They appear on a compilation album that again is compiled by Neil Kay. So he pops up again. He's a busy man, Neil Kay, in 1980. He's a busy man.
He's not very busy and needs to fill his time.
He's got a lot of time to run a nightclub and put together compilation albums. Sure. But this compilation is actually released on EMI, so it's a major label compilation. Okay. Yeah, Metal for Mothers. Mothers spelled Muthas.
Well, that's how you know it's hardcore.
Yeah, because it's for mothers.
Yeah. Sure.
Is that meant to be said in a New York accent? Is that why I was like...
I don't know.
Metal for mothers.
I just feel like you call something metal for mothers and it's sort of... It lends itself to just being a Mother's Day gift.
Yeah,
a very
it does,
inappropriate Mother's Day gift.
Well, if you had got that for your mother on a Mother's Day 1980, she could have enjoyed tracks by Iron Maiden, opening the compilation of Sanctuary. Again, not the version that appears in the first single.
Ooh.
So this is a version of Doug Sampson on drums. Also seemingly just Dave Murray on guitar, but doing overdubs as well.
Okay.
Although there's some discussion, like, did they just get a mate in to do the second guitar parts? Is it Dave? Never quite resolved. Track 2, Sledgehammer by Sledgehammer. Track 3, Fight for Rock and Roll by EF Band.
Sorry, you just going to take me through all the track listing?
We are.
Oh, lordy.
Because this is significant. Track 4, Blues in A by Toad the Wet Sprocket.
What are these names?
Now, amazingly, there are actually 2 bands called Toad the Wet Sprocket.
What?
There's a new wave of British heavy metal band called Toad the Wet Sprocket, and there's an American alternative rock band from the 90s called Toad the Wet Sprocket.
How do 2 bands independently come up with that name?
I think it comes from a Monty Python sketch.
Oh,
but it's still an awful name for a band.
Yes.
And then we get Praying Mantis, Capture City. Like, Praying Mantis go on to be
one of the proponents of New
I mean, their debut album is actually really good. Yeah. Like, as new wave British heavy metal albums go. Then we get a weirdly more sort of Toad frog based band names. A band called Ethel the Frog.
Sure.
Just a lot of frog Toad based band names. Yeah, that's on Fight Back. Angel Witch then with Baphomet. Good band.
Yeah.
First Angel Witch album, very good. Iron Maiden again with Wrathchild.
Iron Maiden get 2 tracks on this compilation.
And interestingly, they're the only band who get 2 tracks.
That's weird.
But then what's also weird is that we get Wrathchild, which doesn't even appear on the debut album. They hold that back till Killers. And again, this isn't the Killers version, of course. This is a version of Doug Sampson on drums. Then we get Sampson, Tomorrow Yesterday, a band called Nuts, who have a song called Bootleggers. And that's the compilation. Jeff Barton, when he reviewed it, described it as a low-budget cash-in, this compilation album, except for whose songs?
Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden, because Jeff Barton really loves Iron Maiden, yeah. And I've got to be honest, like, have you listened to any of... I know Angel Witch, I know Samson.
Angel Witch and Praying Mantis.
We saw Praying Mantis at Bloodstock, didn't we?
Yeah.
They looked like some dads having a lovely weekend.
Yeah.
They were quite good. I don't be horrible to Praying Mantis.
I've also seen Angel Witch at some point opening for someone.
Well, they're playing a Vacan, aren't they?
Yeah. But I saw him in the forum in Kentish Town, and I can't remember who they would have been opening for.
Jeff Barton, for some reason...
Diamond, maybe?
Oh, what a great night that is.
I don't know.
What a great night. Jeff Barton has this odd thing at the time about having a go at Angel Witch for being Black Sabbath copyists.
I just would not have called them
that. It's a really weird thing to have a go at them for, but yeah, every time I see like old reviews of Jeff Barton and Angel Witch, she goes, "Oh yeah, Black Sabbath copy is Angel Witch," like, but they don't really sound like Black Sabbath, Jeff. Anyway, so Neil Kay, he gets the band their profile in a way because he's the one who's indirectly responsible for them being in the music press. He's indirectly responsible for them getting their first recording, really, the Metal from Others recording. Person 2, who has a very big role to play here, is a certain Rod Smallwood.
That's a name that's going to come up a lot in this podcast.
It is going to come up a lot, isn't it, Rod Smallwood? Yeah,
like the Machiavellian puppet master behind all of Iron Maiden's history.
You're painting him to be a very sinister figure. He seems like a very cheerful man.
He's probably all right, but it's just
evil Rod Smallwood, laughing in his tower, cackling away.
Yeah, exactly. He's like the... Yeah.
Go, Steve. Make me money. Lots of money.
Yeah, no, I don't mean he's a villain. It's just he is pulling a lot of the strings in the background throughout their entire history.
But he's not even... But I quite like about Rod Smallwood, he's an oddly visible band manager. Right? If you think of, like, what... who are Metallica managed by? Is it Cliff Bernstein, or what's his name?
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing, you don't really know. Like,
and then you've got, like, Doc McGee...
Doc McGee is another one, yeah. I mean, he does seem like quite a sinister figure.
Oh, yeah, no, he's properly a villain.
He seems quite evil, yeah.
He'll mess you up.
But Rod Smallwood is an oddly visible presence in, well, just the life of Iron Maiden. He's just there, isn't he? Like, he's sort of likes being interviewed a lot. But he gets a copy of the demo because a friend of Steve, let me get the story right, a friend of Steve, possibly from work, played rugby with Rod Smallwood. Like amateur rugby. So he gives this tape to Rod Smallwood, saying, this is the Soundhouse recording, being like, I think you'd like this. And Rod Smallwood was like, oh yeah, I do like it. So he gets in touch with Steve. The rest is history.
There's something quite interesting about like how much, and this is the same of any band history, but like how many sort of slightly random events there are that like chance just happened to work out for them. That's not to say that Maiden haven't put in lots of hard work here or anything, but like, you know, a friend of a friend playing rugby together, and this tape lands up in the manager's hand, and that manager goes on to help shape the band's career. Like, these are all quite interesting, serendipitous moments.
And it's particularly interesting with Rod Smallwood because he actually had experience as a band manager at quite a high level before Iron Maiden.
Right.
So he's become synonymous with Iron Maiden, but prior to that...
How old is Rod Smallwood?
Well, he's not much older than the other guys in Maiden. I think he's a bit older than them, but he's not much older.
So he must be in, what, like mid-20s at this point or something?
Sounds about right, yeah. But he'd already had a career managing Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel.
Right, okay.
You know, Come Up and See Me.
Yeah,
Come Up and See Me. So, you know, Rod Smallwood, I believe was...
Sorry, I want to hear more of this rendition.
Come up and see me. Make me smile.
Again, for all the listeners, Blevin is doing like a Cockney dancing arms to accompany his rendition here.
Because it's Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel. So, obviously. So he had a lot of experience managing bands at quite a high level. Although by the time he gets the Maiden demo tape, apparently he thought those days were behind him.
Right.
I think he was retraining of to become a lawyer, I think.
Okay.
Which is... I could see Rod Smallwood as a lawyer, actually.
This guy's like 25 and he's already thinking, oh man, this life is behind me.
And he's already been to Cambridge University.
Sure.
Although he drops out before he gets his degree, apparently. So he is an immensely intelligent bloke.
Okay.
Like a Yorkshire grammar school boy, so it's not like...
Well, I mean, you can make an argument that going to Cambridge doesn't necessarily mean you're intelligent, but let's not pull at that thread straight away.
Well, no, but I think particularly from Rod's point of view is that he got there through his own craft,
he's an accomplished dude.
Yeah, a very accomplished dude. And so he ends up managing Maiden, and he's the one who negotiates their deal with EMI towards the end of 1979.
Right.
Now, that is quite an interesting record deal he struck, because apparently the negotiations for the deal lasted 2 months.
That's long
for negotiations.
An unsigned small fry band.
Well, exactly. Well, this is how important Rod is because he's the person who convinces the A&R people to firstly go see Maiden live.
Yeah.
EMI expressed an interest. After those negotiations, what he secures for Iron Maiden is a 5-album deal.
Wow.
Yeah, for an unsigned band.
Although, to be fair, like most band signings at that point are multi-album deals.
But this is interesting. Apparently, well, from what I read, even by the standards of the time, to have 5 albums locked in...
5 seems pretty lavish.
...was rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite unusual. And the trade-off for that is they had a relatively small advance.
Right.
So the advance was 50 grand, which is like, you know, a nice wodge in 1980, isn't it? 50 grand.
Yeah. But, yeah, and considering they had only spent... what was it, £250 to do the Soundhouse tapes.
Yeah.
So,
So it's a big chunk of money, but, this is EMI, this is the height of the record industry, 1980. They've got a lot of money to throw around. But Rod says, we'll take a hit for the advance because we want to get that real commitment to 5 albums.
Right. Which
Which is quite a shrewd thing to do, isn't it?
Very forward thinking.
Very forward thinking. And going back to the new wave of British heavy metal, I mean, I'm going to put it out now. I think Iron Maiden just are better than most of those other bands. But most of those other bands didn't have that kind of shrewd management and
they didn't have 5 albums to grow.
No, exactly.
If you think of, and I guess we'll touch on this more in future episodes, but if you think of the progression of Maiden's sound in the space of 5 albums, like in the space of 3 albums, it's a huge shift.
Massive. Well, where are we? So in 5 albums, we go from Iron Maiden to Power Slave.
Yeah, that's
mad, isn't it?
Pretty intense.
Yeah, so we get from Prowler to Rhyme with the Ancient Mariner in almost as many years as well. No, in inferior years, because Power Slave is 84. So from 80 to 84, we're at Power Slave.
That's some accelerated progression there.
Indeed, yeah. But take Diamond Head, for example. Diamond Head apparently were managed by their singers. Is it Sean Harris, singer of Diamond Head?
Yeah.
But they were managed by his mum, which...
Oh.
But bless her. Lovely Mrs. Harris.
Yeah.
Just picking up the phone, going, hello, Diamond Head. Mrs. Harris speaking.
Please book my boys for a gig.
I just love the
What
fact...
do you mean you've got Iron Maiden on?
Mrs. Harris just sounds like a lovely primary school teacher as well. Hello, I'm Mrs. Harris. So there weren't many other bands who had that level of, just had that sort of backup, really.
Had a professional manager.
Yeah, had a professional outfit behind them. And, that undoubtedly hurt them, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because, for a time, people were saying, Diamond Head are the next Led Zeppelin.
Were they?
Yeah, well, Jeff Barton's coming up a lot this week, isn't he?
Have you just read, lots of Jeff Barton articles?
Well, he's a very knowledgeable man when it comes to heavy metal in 1980.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah, he was one of the people who was really pushing Diamond Head. People were pushing Saxon, Def Leppard. I mean, okay, Def Leppard's a bad comparison because they became massive.
Yeah, they became huge.
But yeah, a lot of those other bands, your Angel Witches, your Praying Mantises, you wonder if they had that. They all got major label. Well, certainly Praying Mantis got a major label deal. They had major label deals, but probably not someone in their corner who had that level of insight and understanding that Smallwood had.
I guess to sort of undo what I just said before about the 5 album deal giving Maiden space to grow, I just don't see any of those bands growing in the same way. There is something particular about Maiden, and I guess it goes back to what you were saying before about Steve Harris and him having a particular drive and a sense of momentum, and what I was saying about him having a vision. There's characters like that who help excel a band, right? I mean, I love Diamond Head, but I just don't see them reaching that level even with the right support.
Yeah, and I'm jumping the gun here a bit, but those songs in the Maiden debut album are just better than 99% of the other songs in other and Robin debut albums.
I mean, it's pretty slim pickings around.
Oh, come on. There's some good stuff. That's the thing. There's some really good stuff that comes out.
Yeah, I know. I'm being harsh.
Individual albums, maybe less so. There's some great material that comes out. But, yeah, I would just say Maiden were better, personally.
Well, I mean, of course you would. You're very biased.
I mean, yeah, no one's saying this is an impartial opinion, Sam, but it's very good. Would you like to know about the recording of the album? As concisely as I can.
Yeah.
So,
now I would.
After 2 aborted attempts to record the debut album, with Doug Sampson still in the band. So interestingly, it's one of those things, talking about serendipity. It seems a real matter of luck and chance that Doug Sampson doesn't end up being on the first Iron Maiden album, because they have a couple of attempts, they go into the studio, they think they're going to record it, it doesn't work. Do you want to know one of the people who was going to produce Iron Maiden?
I mean, I do. I'm just trying to figure out if I can guess it.
I mean, it's pointless, you won't guess it.
Okay.
Andy Scott. Who's Andy Scott? He's one of the guitar players in the Suite.
Oh.
Of, Ballroom Blitz.
Yeah, no, I know the
fame.
Suite.
Yeah. So Andy Scott was going to do it, but Andy Scott is the person, as producer, who apparently says to Steve Harris, you should play with a pick.
Ah.
To which Steve Harris says,
no.
Never. No. And so Andy Scott goes. So the session that begins what we eventually know as either the debut album we have in our hands begins at Kingsway Studios in London, January 1980. And it's only just before the album, really like a matter of weeks or months before, I think, that the band is joined by Clive Burr and Dennis Stratton. So it's quite a new group that goes in. They haven't gigged a lot at all with Clive and Dennis.
I mean, considering they've had several years of just like really refining them as a unit, for there to be 2 personnel shifts just before recording the album is pretty.
It is,
major.
yeah. Who do you think was the band's first choice for second guitar?
I mean,
he's come up already, albeit briefly.
Rod Smallwood, Neil Kay,
Adrian Smith.
Oh.
Adrian Smith and Dave Murray were childhood friends. They've known each other for a long time. So when they knew they needed a second guitar player, they're like, look, we've got a major record deal. They originally approached Adrian to play on the debut album, but Adrian was committed to his band Urchin, who'd also just been offered a record deal, apparently. Quite what happened to that record deal. Yeah, well, not really, because Urchin never recorded a full-length album, so I don't know what happened there.
Less happy then.
Well, indeed, yeah. So
miserable times.
Yeah, so poor Adrian has to wait a little bit. So they get Dennis Stratton and Clive Burr in, and they are, of course, they complete the first lineup of Iron Maiden, really, or the first recorded.
Yeah, there's clearly been several lineups, but the first, I guess, officialized.
Yeah, the first official, like Iron Maiden Mark 1, if you will.
Yeah,
like is that lineup. And do you know why Doug Sampson is told? Well, it's interesting with Doug Sampson because it seems a little bit, was he pushed? Did he jump?
So, you make it sound like he was killed by Steve Harris.
Sorry, yeah, this is getting to libelous territory now.
Yeah.
No, just for the record, Steve Harris didn't kill Doug Sampson.
Good.
Doug Sampson was, depending who you believe to, he either left or was asked to leave. As far as I can work out, just because he was quite sickly.
Oh.
He just got ill quite a lot.
Oh.
And Steve Harris just couldn't put up with it, the fact he was always ill.
Well, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, there's no suggestion he had any kind of chronic health condition. He just seemed...
It's just
seemed quite
poor
sickly.
Immune system.
Yeah.
Oh man, poor guy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but apparently Doug, when he's interviewed about it now, he was like, "Oh yeah, I just couldn't hack it. Kept getting really bad colds.
Well, yeah, I mean,
just trying to play drums, but it's just snot everywhere. Kept spluttering all over my cymbals.
But I mean, I guess like if physically he wasn't up to it and like up to the touring lifestyle, then being in a professional band is not really.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Yeah, he doesn't seem to have any hard feelings about it.
Yeah,
and also they got Clive Burr, who is a monster drummer. I think Clive Burr.
Yeah,
like amazing. Dennis Stratton has a sort of interesting past because he was a little bit older than the other guys, and also interesting because he doesn't really seem to like heavy metal.
I just always forget that Dennis Stratton was ever in the band.
I imagine Dennis Stratton probably forgets he was in Iron Maiden a lot of the time. I mean, he wasn't in the band for long, was he?
But what?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. That was a weird summer. But yeah, he doesn't really seem to like heavy metal. He liked the Eagles. He liked Queen.
Well, who would like heavy metal?
Well, indeed. Rubbish.
Music for meatheads and idiots.
Rubbish. The Eagles. That's good music.
that is artistic merit in musical format.
But he was actually much more experienced than all the other members of the band when they went into the studio.
Right.
So he'd been in bands that had actually, recorded in professional studios. He was in a band that did an UK tour opening for Status Quo. Like when Status Quo... So he'd played arenas, arenas didn't really exist then, did they?
He played like big
theatres,
venues before
anyone
Maiden
else had.
And going back into like pub gigs.
Exactly. So he was a very safe pair of hands and had also been a session guitar player. So like a very good player.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess we'll talk about this. A really good player who he kind of doesn't make his mark on the album much, does he?
No. I mean, like, going back to the bootlegs you mentioned, the Soundhouse tapes, like, the guitar lines don't tend to change that much by the time you reach the debut album. So, but I guess also when you're being drafted in just before recording an album where all the songs are written, how much of an impact can you have? Yeah,
fair enough. And, he does the job, doesn't he? Like, plays the part, job done. So the album is produced. It's recorded quite quickly because Maiden, at the time, they're involved in the Metal for Mothers tour.
Again, I'm just imagining a lot of old ladies on this tour, like, just... I mean, I'm imagining Sean Harris's mother, like, promoting this tour quite significantly.
Oh, she'd love it, wouldn't she, old Mrs. Harris? Just like... But yeah, so Maiden on this sort of tour that seemed to have this revolving cast of bands. Motorhead were on it for a bit, interestingly again.
Okay.
Praying Mantis, the usual suspects of, in modern bands. So they have to record it quite quickly. They get a chap in to produce it called Will Malone.
Cool.
What
That name means nothing to me.
Absolutely nothing. Well, Will
Stop
Malone...
leaving pregnant pauses, expecting me to know who this sort of rogues gallery
Malone.
of random Londoners is.
Well, Will Malone, he wasn't their original choice. Some people say they wanted Martin Birch to produce the debut album.
Right.
But either he was
Who
busy...
are these people?
Well, people in Iron Maiden.
Okay,
Martin
right.
Birch says that. But it seems that, well, I don't know, I've heard two versions of it. Either they asked Martin Birch, but he was busy because he was recording Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath at the time, I think. Lots of good stuff going on in 1980. Or I heard Steve say that they wanted to approach him, but they just thought he'd say no because they were an unknown band and he was Martin
particularly if
Birch.
He's producing Black Sabbath at that
Oh
point.
yeah, and he'd already done Rainbow Rising
Yeah.
and Deep Purple's. Is he the engineer on Made in Japan? Like he was a big name, Martin Birch at the time.
Big dog.
So yeah, they end up with Will Malone, who had worked with Black Sabbath, but largely doing orchestral arrangements for Black Sabbath.
Sure.
So as far as I can tell, he's not really produced anything. Looking at his credits, like bits and bobs, but
that bodes well.
Well, yeah. Would you like to know what Steve Harris had to say about Will Malone? Yes.
I really dislike him. He's a toolbox. He made us sound punk.
Well, almost. We used to laugh about Malone sitting there with his feet up on the desk, smoking a big cigar and reading Country Life, because he didn't do fuck all else. We tried to get some feedback off this guy, and he'd just go, "Oh, I think you could do better." So in the end, we just ignored him.
Wow, that's kind of like the Rick Rubin approach to production, right? Like, I'll be there maybe a little bit in body, definitely not in spirit.
Will Malone was very ahead of his time in a way, wasn't he? Just going, yeah, you could do that again. But seemingly Will Malone didn't really like Iron Maiden. Again, didn't really seem to like heavy metal, was just there picking up his paycheck. But they did have an engineer called Martin Leven. Now, if I'm right in thinking, Martin Leven went on to have a career as like a sound engineer for musicals, worked a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber stuff. So he went on to be very successful in his own right. But the band are much more complimentary about Martin Leven. They basically say that Will Malone did absolutely nothing, and them and Martin Leven sort of, between them, put the album together in the studio.
Right, okay.
Is the story you get. And that is the background to Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden.
That is an awful lot of background. But it does set a very interesting context, and it puts a lot of expectation on that debut album.
Yeah, it does.
There's so much history before the album is even recorded or released that, it better be good, Blev.
But that's it. But it's quite anticipated. That's the thing. They're not just like a new band dropping an album out into an unknown world.
No, there's a lot.
There are lots of people who are really like hyped and excited for this album because they've been written about a lot. They've already been on the cover of Sounds by this point, I think, as well. They've already done like an extensive UK tour, playing Scotland, England, Wales.
Again, so different to how music releases nowadays. Like you just wouldn't get that same level of anticipation for an unsigned band for their debut release. If anything, they'll drop a release and then build an audience afterwards, provided they've got like record label support and stuff. But yeah, it was a different era.
It was, yeah. A better era, some might say.
Some might say.
I mean, you could see Iron Maiden in Port Albert, so
that sounds pretty good.
That sounds better, yeah. Like, a lot of those places now are just oases of live music, aren't they? Like, you just, I mean, other than local covers bands, you wouldn't get a touring band come to Port Albert now, really.
No, but we could spend an entire album talking about, like, the difficulties of live music in mid and South Wales.
So but Maiden, through their touring, through the magazines, through everything else, they've created they're almost like a sort of semi-big name in an underground kind of way.
Well, with all that anticipation then, that feels like quite a good point to leave it for this episode. So we've got all the precursor stuff before the album comes out, and then next episode we can go into the album proper.
Sounds good.
We got a lot of opinions, I'm sure.
Many opinions indeed.
Tune in next time.
Bye, everyone.